Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Masterclass listening session. It's so nice to have so many people attending. It's so exciting. Um, I am Jessie Lawson. I am in my kind of like everyday job, a radio producer and sound designer. I work on like narrative non-fiction usually. And I'm also the Fellows Coordinator for this year's Multitrack Fellowship. So I am part of my job is coordinating the training program, which the Multitrack Fellows do every Friday. And this is part of that program. So what we're doing this year as a new project is the Fellows receive training every Friday morning, and then we're running these masterclass listening sessions every Friday afternoon. And it's a chance for people to get to meet different audio producers and have a more like intimate way of hearing and speaking to them about their own creative processes. And we have extended the invitation out to the wider audio world as well, which is why, so the fellows are attending this for free, and then we've ticketed a pay what you can option for other people who want to attend. And it's so exciting to have everyone here, and thank you so much to Tom for being our first audio producer to come and share their work with us. The way that this is going to work is the first thing we're going to do is, as a group, listen to a piece that Tom's made, and then we'll get a chance to kind of like ask specific questions about the piece afterwards. But before we do that, welcome, Tom. Would you like to just introduce yourself and give us any context that you would like to about the piece?
Yeah, of course. Happy to. So hello, I'm Tom. I currently work at BBC Studios. Before that, I was at a narrative sort of serial production company called Vespucci. And before that, Novel, and before that, Audible. But I've made a couple of different pieces for Love and Radio, Criminal, Shortcuts, and then narrative series for some of the big platforms. This piece is something I made a couple of years ago now for Love and Radio. And if you haven't listened to Love and Radio, I highly recommend it. Each episode is one character who has lived a strange, unusual, or remarkable life in some way. And that's all I'll say about the episode for now. And we'll come on to why at the end, but I really hope you enjoy it.
Thanks so much, Tom. So I'm going to share the audio from the piece now. I would encourage everyone to turn off your cameras, lie down if you want to. The piece is 40 minutes long and we'll be listening to the whole thing, so get comfortable. And just as a content note, this piece discusses sex and sexuality, homophobia, and there is a brief mention of sexual violence. Okay, I will see you all in 40 minutes.
I can describe the process that I remember most intensely, though. They call this guts work, and it's because basically you spill your guts. There's a process that's about a half hour for each man. You volunteer, and you go into the center of this rectangle that's taped onto the floor. The staff is there to assist you. They ask you what's going on inside you. Like, why are you here? Like, what is the piece of inner work that you need to do? Mine had to do with my relationship with my father, which had not been good. And I don't remember specifically what it was, but what I do recall was the idea of him being dead. And he wasn't dead at that point, but the idea of him being in the grave. And was I ready to say goodbye to him? Was I ready to make peace with him? And I wasn't. So a man was playing my father. He's under a blanket in the grave. They take me and they stick me under the blanket too, so I'm in the grave with my father. And I went completely passive. I'm like, oh, okay, this feels okay. I'm kind of comfortable here. They're like, you're comfortable being dead with your father in your father's grave? That's comfortable? Yeah, I think I'm okay. They knew that I had sons, so they chose two men to be my sons, and they stuck them in there with me. I mean, my father was already dead emotionally, Now I'm dead emotionally, but the idea now of my sons, following in that same path freaked me. We've got 3 fucking generations of men here dead. And that's when I exploded. Of course, there are like 10 men around, kneeling on the edges of the blanket so that I can't get out. And I found strength in me that I didn't know was there, that adrenaline surge, and got out of there. And then it was like this rebirth experience after that. That was the central point on that retreat. And that was the point at which I believe these changes that I talked about really happened. Did I get what I was looking for? I didn't know what I was looking for, but I got life change. Yeah, so then let's see.
From Luminary, you're listening to Love and Radio. I'm Nick Vanderkolk. Today's episode, Journey Into Manhood, featuring David Matheson.
My beloved brothers and sisters, it is a joy to be with you again in another general conference. Regarding our home evenings, a home evening with the family or an evening out to some place of interest with your family only partly solves the need.
Living in Utah, growing up in the 1960s and 70s, the LDS Church was central to everything.
We have recommended that so far as possible, all the children have their own scriptures and learn to use them.
We would have 3 different meetings on Sundays. You'd go to one meeting, go home, later go to another one, go home, in the evening go to a third meeting, go home. Then there's another meeting on like Wednesday or Thursday morning or evening for the children or the young adults. So it was the center of our lives.
These are happy days, the days of the patriarchs.
Spencer W. Kimball was the president of the LDS Church from the time I was a pretty young child.
We extend to every listener a cordial invitation to come to the watered garden, to the shade of pleasant trees.
He was this sweet, small, Yoda-like man who had this raspy, hoarse voice from cancer.
Come with us to the sureness, security.
He was so sweet and so loving and so gentle until he talked about homosexuality.
Let us vigorously oppose the shocking developments which encourage the old sins of Sodom and Gomorrah.
And then he became fierce and...
There's said to be millions of perverts.
I mean, it just sounded like he was utterly...
God will not be mocked.
Utterly disgusted by the whole concept.
Homosexuality is an ugly sin.
And I think my response to that was denial. This is so bad, I can't even admit to myself that the feelings that I have are that.
It is the sin of the ages. It was present in Israel's wandering, as well as after and before. It was tolerated by the Greeks.
I didn't really accept that I was gay until I was 23. But I was aware of my attractions from the time I was probably 13, 14, 15. That's when it started to become pretty blatant to me that when I was masturbating, I was thinking about other boys.
Who would you think about? Were there specific people? Or I guess I ask because I remember I must have been 15, 16, something like that. One of the guys on the rugby team I was just obsessed with, and you're playing a game with yourself in the changing room where you're like, I want to get as many glances as possible without. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. Stealing as many furtive glances as you possibly can to build an inner library of different angles of different boys that you can use later. There's one incident. This is in high school. I remember for some reason I'm walking by myself across a field And there's this boy walking toward me, and he's wearing only shoes and red gym shorts, no shirt. And I don't know if he was wearing anything under the gym shorts, but as I remember, I think one of his hands was in his shorts. But I remember his upper body was just so, so muchness. I mean, I walked past him and then he was gone. But, the brain can slow down 3 seconds and make it last nearly an eternity. And I think my brain did that. To this day, I have a mental picture of what he looked like, which is probably vastly different. He was probably some skinny kid, but to me, at that time, he was like this muscular, beautiful, tan piece of exquisite meat. In the LDS Church, one of the things that happens is you have a yearly interview with your priesthood leader, your bishop. And he's going to ask you the questions about chastity and morality, and he's going to ask you, do you masturbate or do you play with yourself or something like that? I told my bishop at that point that I had masturbated, and by that time I had started experimenting with like anal stimulation, because by that time I was aware that I could be gay if I wanted, and I was curious, and I wondered what it would feel like, and so I stuck something in there. And I remember trying to confess that to him, and I literally could not speak. Like, I started and I said, like, there's I told him about masturbation. I said, and there's something else. Oh, and I told him also that I had attractions to men. Not only do I masturbate, but I'm attracted to men, and I stimulate myself anally, but I couldn't say it. He finally ventured a guess. Have you put something in your anus? And I'm like, yes. And so then he asked questions. Did it feel good? Did it give you orgasm? Because I don't think it actually will. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about this. And it seemed like he was trying to prove to me that being gay wasn't a thing because anal stimulation didn't make you orgasm. That's what I took from it. It was just kind of confusing because I'm like, well, yeah. I don't know. He seemed to know more than I did about it.
My name is David Matheson, and
I'm Peggy Matheson.
And we've been married for, we've been married for almost 28 years.
I know when we've talked about your meeting with your wife a couple of times, you've said, it was just a regular courtship every day. But I'd be curious to find out more. Where did you notice her? Where was that?
This was a summer term at Brigham Young University. It was a theater history class.
It was a theater class, of course.
We did our final project together.
And
it made me laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh.
And I thought, okay, there's something special about her.
And so I asked her out to lunch probably. And I know by this time that I'm dating for marriage, not necessarily her, but it's not just like we're, just goofing off in high school. Because I knew by that time, I wanted to get married. I was really ready to not be alone.
The next day after that we first kissed, and I remember when he held me, it was like I never wanted to let go. It's like, this is it. I can feel it. This is eternity to me. So I think it was like 2 weeks from there that
we were engaged. Yeah.
About a year into our marriage, I realized that my attractions were not changing. I was attracted to her, we were sexual, and it worked. And my attractions to other guys were still there and getting stronger. And so I knew I had to talk to her. And so one morning, I remember it being morning because I remember the sun coming through the windows. This was on the east side of the house, this little kitchen, that tiny little kitchen that we had. And just sitting down with her at this tiny table in this tiny room, it was a beautiful circumstance because the sun is flowing in and she's beautiful. And I'm telling her this hard truth that I'm attracted to men. Hard, even though I wasn't telling her I'm not attracted to you, I'm gay, this is over. That's not at all what was going on. I had every intention of, living out this marriage, but I just thought that she needed to know that I was also attracted to guys. She was really calm. She didn't freak out. She didn't react. She was just really calm. I remember that there was a point at which she was teary, but I think the teariness was like compassion and connection and love. Her message was, I'm still with you. Let's go forward and we'll make it work. We probably had really good sex that night. Next morning, things were normal and felt fine.
But even after you knew, even after I told you about my same-sex attraction, we still didn't know about therapy, and so we were just trying to make things work without any help from the outside. And that was tough.
Coming up, he claims he's reversed homosexual tendencies in hundreds of his patients through therapy. Stay with us.
My name is Joseph Nicolosi. I'm a clinical psychologist.
He says it's entirely possible for gays to change their ways.
I believe that one's core is defined by one's value system. My men are deeply committed.
Joseph Nicolosi.
Dr. Joseph Nicolosi.
Interesting figure in my past.
Well, many of you are here, you're here because you were personally touched by the question of, or the issue of homosexuality. Most people would rather not think about homosexuality unless something happens to
His
them.
book had been really instrumental in my early attempts to overcome same-sex attraction.
For the individual who wants to change, and if the therapist and the client are working together in what we call the therapeutic alliance, he will begin to experience a diminishment in his same-sex attraction.
So this actually opens a larger question of what is conversion therapy. Or actually, I mean, we don't use the term conversion therapy. That was made up by people who talk about us, but we never use that term. His term is reparative therapy. And the concept behind reparative therapy is...
Homosexuality is a gender identity disorder.
Everyone is born heterosexual.
We are all heterosexual. But some of us...
And that some people develop a homosexual problem.
Homosexual behavior is always, my wife says, when you speak publicly, never speak in absolutes. I'm saying homosexuality is always prompted by an inner sense of loneliness and emptiness.
When I was going to finish my degree, I proposed to him that I come and work as a psychological assistant.
This is our Thomas Aquinas Clinic in Encino, California.
And I was there with him in his office as his psychological assistant, one of them, for about 8 years.
We have about 135 cases ongoing each week. I have a staff of 7 therapists, and this is the work we do.
Everything resonated with me, like 100%, because the way he described the family relationship.
We typically see what we call the classic triadic relationship.
Lo and behold, that fit me.
Critical father, hostile father.
My father was distant and terrifying to me.
Emotionally over-involved, intrusive, domineering mother.
I was close with my mother, who was on the one hand kind of close and on the other hand kind of abandoning.
His sense of masculinity is discouraged by the mother's disconnecting.
You know, I had a distant relationship with my brother.
Never have I met a man with a homosexual issue who had a loving, trusting relationship with the older brother.
I didn't get along with other boys. I wasn't into sports.
We see this pattern over and over again.
I mean, I was a poster child for his theory. But what makes that even more interesting is that when I went through my own therapy before becoming his psychological assistant, the therapy shifted my sexuality to some degree. I could choose to privilege the heterosexual side of myself over my homosexual side, and I could choose to sublimate it, which means to experience closeness with men in non-sexual ways, and also to repress the deep need for intimacy with men. And it worked. I grew up with same-sex attraction, but I didn't want it. I wanted something more than what I was. So I began on a journey to find the truth. I mean, I was intensely and consciously motivated by the intention to help people to relieve suffering, to relieve pain, to stand up for people who had been marginalized, not only marginalized by society in general, but marginalized by gay society. I became a counselor myself. I realized that what I was trying to do as a therapist was to create wholeness in a person's sense of their gender. Now, I find myself here. I'm 50 years old. I'm happily married. I used the term gender wholeness for the work that I did. I called it gender wholeness therapy, and my clinic was called the Center for Gender Wholeness. And now, I'm here to help you.
David Matheson has been a pioneer in the field of overcoming SSA for over 15 years.
During that period of time, I also wrote a book. So I was pretty busy in those days.
Come learn from David Matheson in person at this special event near you. Registration is limited, so register now by clicking on the link below this video or go to cgwevents.com.
It's just amazing.
Part summer camp bonding, part therapeutic peer counseling, this 48-hour retreat is called Journey Into Manhood.
Take a deep breath. Let it out.
When a man arrives at Journey Into Manhood, they're usually held at like some kind of a YMCA camp or a Christian camp off in the woods somewhere. A lot of the locations are just so beautiful, kind of out in the forest in nature, my favorite place. The men arrive by car. They're usually pretty nervous. They're all standing around in a parking lot as they check in one at a time. Someone takes their bags and puts it in their room for them. It's a very friendly, very warm environment, warm greetings, a lot of talking and laughing and guys getting to know each other. And then they're sent one at a time down a pathway where they meet 4 men one at a time.
What is your greatest fear this weekend?
Of letting people down and myself.
And these men, I was usually the first one that they met, asked them a question like, why are you here?
What is your greatest fear this weekend?
My greatest fear, just not being present and not being here, doing what God wants me to do.
Another question might be, who are you as a man? What do you hope to get from this weekend? Those kinds of questions to cause this introspection.
My greatest fear is that I will leave without having touched someone else's life.
And then they go in a room and they sit, and there's this soft flute music playing, and they just sit for quite a while until everyone's there, and then the weekend starts.
I'd like all of you to put your hands in your lap.
Journey into Manhood, a lot of it's indoors. There's a lot of like visualizations and journaling. There's a process where they write down things that they want to surrender, to let go of, and they put them into a fire. There's a process where they stand on this field at night and they all have candles, and we talk about how they are the light of their community and go out into the world and be a light to the community around you. There's a somewhat controversial process where the men hold each other. One of the men is taking on kind of a father energy, and the man that he's holding is going into his kind of his boy self and letting a loving father hold him. And this is all done in a group, you know, so it's not like they're slinking off into dark corners with their clothes off. This is done with a great deal of care being taken.
Am I right in thinking one of the therapies was for men to stand in a circle naked?
Yes. The men are in a room, everyone is naked, and the intention and the dialogue, the discourse that happens here is to overcome the shame of your own body.
Look at the outside of this man.
Overcome the shame of seeing other men's bodies.
Look at his physical appearance.
And to experience them in a...
Look into this man's heart.
You know, in a shame-free and non-sexual way.
Look into his soul. Now look more deeply.
The process that's probably the most potentially harmful, so it's in a small group, and one man is in the center, and it's him doing his work, and he recounts some kind of life experience that he has pain around. It could be anything from being shamed by a religious leader, to feeling his anger toward God, to being bullied, to being raped, you know, all sorts of things. And you never know what the man is going to bring up. And then what you do in this process is you set up an opportunity for that man to re-experience that and to win. Because in all of those experiences, they came away feeling like they lost. They lost to God, they lost to their mother, they lost to the rapist, they lost to the bully, they lost to their brother. And so you recreate that experience in some way and give them an opportunity to come away from it feeling empowered, feeling healed, and feeling whole.
If I've understood the timeline right, you were in an intimate relationship with a man, or at least sharing a home with a man at the same time that you were running Journey Into Manhood.
Yes. Yeah, you want me to talk about that, don't you? Yeah. So, how do I introduce that? Oh, he was dreamy. He really was. He really was. I mean, I love him to this day. First of all, he was extremely attractive to me. Really nice body, really nice looking guy. Broad shoulders, big chest. I mean, he's just handsome. Super handsome. If you could see my face, you'd see the smile. But I didn't really know him very well. And then there was like a leadership retreat where we were, I don't know what we were doing, developing new processors or something. I don't know what we were doing. And he was there. He was part of it. As part of a process, I asked him to do some holding with me, to hold me. He and I and another man spent some time, and he just held me. The other man was there as our chaperone, right? In this holding, which was just, lying together and just holding each other with clothes on, we were like looking into each other's eyes, and this thing happened. This, oh my gosh, I see you, and I see that you see me, and I really feel this intense draw toward you. I mean, as I look back, I mean, we fell in love with each other.
And how did you decide to kind of house share together?
So I got this apartment close to my office because I lived too far away. And he moved in there and was working with me kind of as a paraprofessional. And we would sleep together. We would hold each other, on and off all night. And then we would get up, we'd make breakfast together, we'd go to the gym together, come home, shower, not together, go to work together, come home together, and do the same thing. I mean, it was so domestic.
And you stayed at your family home together sometimes as well?
Yeah, on the weekends, because he didn't have any place else to go. He let go of his apartment. He lived in a different city, miles away, hundreds of miles away. And so he was with us. He was with us on the weekend, and my kids knew him and loved him, and my wife knew him and loved him, and my wife knew that obviously she knew we were living together. She knew we were close. She did not know we were sleeping in the same bed.
But he would sleep in a different room when he came to stay with you.
Yeah, he did not sleep in the bed with my wife and I. we happened to have a guest bedroom down.
Stupid question, Tom. Yeah, stupid question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's clarify that it was not a threesome, which does not mean that in the morning my wife had to drive the kids someplace, and so as soon as she left, I would run downstairs and just cuddle with them for 20 minutes or 30 minutes or so. It was insatiable.
What was going through your mind when you were having these cuddling sessions? Like, how did you feel like you were doing something wrong, or?
I really didn't. I mean, he and I had set a boundary that this is not going to be sexual. That meant we are not going to, touch each other's genitalia and come to orgasm. That doesn't mean we didn't touch each other. We just didn't bring it to orgasm. In other words, it wasn't about sexual release. It was about closeness, physical closeness, intimacy, connection. And, some people listening to this are going to say, that's so much bullshit. Who are these people? Are they fooling themselves? Okay, if you want to see it that way, I don't care. See it however you want to. But I know that for us, for both of us, we were able to maintain a boundary that was important to us while also, experiencing something that met a need that we both had. there was a moment, I may have told you about this before, there was a moment with him in this apartment where I was making us breakfast. Well, I think he was in the shower and I was making us breakfast. And I had this realization that I thought of him and me as, I don't know how to describe this, but like as one unit. And it's not that our identities were fused or anything psychologically crazy like that, but it's like, we both have to eat. I'm going to make his breakfast. Like I want to make his breakfast. And I realized I never feel that with my wife. This feeling of the desire to do for him, I don't feel that with her. And I thought that's something that has been missing from my side of the marriage, not from her side, but from my side. I think bad about it, but I also felt like, okay, I need to take this and I need to import that into my marriage because that'll help my marriage. And I tried to import that and then kind of realized I can fake that here, but it doesn't come naturally. And that, I think, tells me something about who I should be in a relationship with.
Do you remember coming out to her?
Coming out meaning I'm gonna divorce you and go into a gay relationship? Yeah, I remember that really well. That was one of the more hellish conversations I've ever had. So what I was explaining was my attractions to women and you are gone. I'm only attracted to men. I'm intending to divorce you and I'm intending to have a relationship with a man. It took me about 10 seconds to say it to you. It took me a long time to say it to her. Eventually I started realizing, wait a second, this is going to be upsetting to a lot of people. This is going to be upsetting to former clients. This is going to be upsetting to relatives of former clients. This is going to be upsetting to that whole movement. This is going to be confusing to people in my congregation. It's going to be confusing to my family. But I had no idea that my story was going to have international interest.
Do you remember like where you were when you got that phone call from Truth Wins Out?
Yeah, I was standing right over there by the table here in my kitchen, eating breakfast Sunday morning. I think I was in my suit already, getting ready to go to church. The phone rings. I pick it up and he says, "Hello, David, this is Wayne Besson." And I knew who he was. I'd known who he was for years. He was kind of like, the great Satan to me.
Joining us now with reaction, Wayne Besson, gay rights activist, founder of truthwinsout.org.
Ex-gay watchdog, yellow journalism thing.
Wayne, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Wayne, again, that comes down to the question.
It was a pretty short conversation. He said, we're gonna print this story. My editor or whatever is ready to print this. Do you have a comment? I said, I don't have one off the top of my head. He said, we're gonna print in 10 minutes. I was completely unprepared for that.
The big news now is that prominent gay conversion practitioner, I don't even want to call him a therapist, David Matheson,
described by some as the intellectual godfather of gay cure therapy,
making news by coming out as a gay man seeking a male partner.
It was all over the internet. It was on the Drudge Report. It was in print publications around the world. It was just ridiculous.
Some of his most influential work was as the architect of retreats offering conversion therapy.
What is happening on these weekends and in these group settings is predatory, dangerous, and irresponsible.
One man who attended the camp on a number of occasions told us he was subjected to traumatic psychodrama techniques.
A lot of guys love it. Other guys, it creates a real problem for them.
The biggest tragedy at the bottom of this is that he still seems to think that this so-called ex-gay therapy is legitimate.
He seems to be interested in understanding the harm that he's done, but I don't feel that he's gone far enough.
And you now admit that they can't be converted. But the guy leading the business of trying to convert gay people has now admitted you can't be converted. That is purely the purest definition of a sham, surely.
If you want to understand the real story, I'd be happy to describe it to you, but it
explain to me why it's not a sham that the man... Well, okay, here's my question for you. Explain to me why it's not a shame.
You know, speaking personally as an out gay man, I have this real conflict because I look at the journey that you've been on and I'm like, this is a guy that's been struggling under such enormous social and religious pressure, and he needs time to heal from that. You know, internalized homophobia is a real thing, but I look at, you know, some of this other work and I'm like, yeah, but not all of us create programs like this. And I think from some of the people who I've spoken to who attended gym, some of them feel like the program sort of hindered that self-acceptance for them, that they were using it to try and push away a part of themselves that was kind of core to who they are. You're surrounded by men, you're looking at these bodies and exhausting yourself, constantly trying to say, I'm not attracted to this man, I'm not attracted to this man, I'm not attracted to this man. And you just leave that feeling completely drained. And does it, do you,
well, I think,
do you think that that kind of practice is harmful in?
Well, let's back up. Some men, the message that they got from wherever and the way they went about their own work was like you just said. They're trying in their head to say, I'm not attracted to this man. In other words, they're trying to persist in a lie. That's not the way I did it. And that's not what I ever taught anybody. I knew I was attracted to men. I knew my clients were attracted to men. I was, you know, my efforts with my clients was, let's be truthful. Let's be honest about the fact you're attracted to men. But what are you going to do with it? But now we're kind of splitting hairs, because still it's at what point in the process are you going to tell the lie? Are you going to tell the lie by saying, no, I'm not attracted to these men? That's nonsense. And that's a lie. Or are you going to tell it further down the road when you say, okay, I am attracted to men, I'm gay, and I don't have to do something with it. Now, all you've done is move where you tell the lie. I was just telling the lie later. I was admitting, yeah, I'm attracted to this man. Yeah, I need to be close. Yeah, I need hugging. Yeah, I need cuddling. Yeah, I need to make out with this guy in bed. But then there's still the lie. I don't need to be married to this man. I don't need to spend my life with a man. And that's where the lie was. Yeah, and honestly, Thomas, what I just told you about, you know, the choices, where do you put the lie? I never thought of that. I never realized that until I said it just 2 minutes ago. And that hurts my heart to think about that. Because ultimately, really, at the end of the day, as much good as it does for men, and I mean, it serves men who are just not, kind of like me, for all those years, I was not going to make the choice to come out. That was just not even on the table. Because of the way I was raised, because of the whole culture in which I was ensconced, because of my belief about my church, there was not a way that I was going to accept myself as a gay man. And so when I think about that, you know, I can think to myself, okay, so we were doing something merciful. We were giving morphine to these amputees because otherwise they were just going to be sitting there in pain. But then the other side of that two-edged sword is, yeah, and we are helping them continue to tell this lie to themselves. Gay is a choice. You don't have to be gay. Man, that hurts. I think maybe the ones where there's maybe the strongest sense of regret is the men who were single. You know, so they didn't have a wife in the picture to kind of blunt the loneliness. These single men who are trying to find some kind of happiness in life, and they're trying so hard to please everyone but themselves. They're trying to please a God who's been defined by a heteronormative culture. They're trying to please church leaders. They're trying to please parents. They're trying to please, I don't know, some paradigm that they have in their head of who they're supposed to be. The thing that they just cannot do is accept the truth about themselves, which is actually really beautiful. And they've been taught to see it as ugly. And then there I am in that picture, focusing all the hard work, because they worked hard. I mean, I'm not going to lie, they worked hard in therapy. But what if that hard work had been focused instead on coming to accept the real truth? If I let myself go into that regret, that's going to be a bottomless well. And I know I need to go there. And I kind of feel like I need to go there with them. Like I wish I could sit down with them and grieve that together. You know, cry together with them about how I helped them continue to tell this lie to themselves. And I did that because I was telling the lie to myself. And we all meant well. But it didn't have to be that way.
That's it for Love and Radio. This episode was produced by Thomas Curry, Stephen Jackson, and Phil Domhovsky.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Tom. I'm such a huge fan of your work and a really, really big fan of that piece as well. It was really, special to get to listen to it again in this context. I'm going to open the floor for questions now. So how that's going to work is if you have a question, please just put it in the chat and then I will start asking to Tom. But I'll just kick off with one of my own while people come back from that listening and think about what they might want to ask. You chose to call this session Structuring for Surprise. And I guess I'd like to hear a little bit about why you chose that as a subject. And I was thinking about that while I was listening, because obviously, I guess if you're sitting in the pub with a friend telling the story, you'd be like, there was this guy who was gay and he was really big in the gay conversion therapy movement and he caused a lot of harm and he had a boyfriend the whole time. And there's a version of the story that you could tell in 2 seconds. And this was 40 minutes and didn't give everything away straight away. And so, I'd like to hear a little bit about how you made those decisions and how you keep something interesting and compelling whilst not giving all the information to the listener, but then helping them understand what's going on in the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. Tell me if this doesn't answer the question, because I have a tendency just to waffle on and end up down some garden path. But I think when I was first speaking to Love and Radio about the story and about David, the question that we all had was how are we going to get people to care about him and the journey that he's been on? Because to me, his journey was slightly indicative of some of the experiences of people who were signing up to this course. And I had spoken to a bunch of people who had been on the program, and some of them had very conflicting feelings about it. But I guess part of the reason we structured it that way is because, as well as there being surprises in the plot, like what actually happens in the story. We wanted you to feel surprised that you could initially sympathize with this person or find them a bit unusual but kind of intriguing, and then you realize what they've done and you're maybe horrified or shocked or confused, and can we pull you back to a place of sympathy even if we're not letting you off the hook? I still hate the last question that I asked him because it's so shy and tentative, and I was so nervous. I'm not a very confrontational person, as you can probably tell, but so I have reservations about that. But I think that's partly what I meant by surprise, that at the end of a story, a listener could feel maybe a little bit unsettled about how they felt about what they just heard. That maybe the emotional response is a bit more complicated than it would be if you were telling it the way that you would tell it to a friend at the pub. I don't know if that answers the question. Oh, sorry, Jesse, just on mute.
I've been doing so well with technology, but that's fine. Yeah, that did. Thank you so much. Yeah, and then just on a, I guess on a more like specific level, we were talking before we opened the call about like the cold open that you chose. So that's like the bit at the beginning where you have no idea who this person is. He's not introduced himself at all, but you're just launched into someone's story. Could you talk a tiny bit about like the process of choosing that tape? Like, how do you work out what is the little compelling bit that you can use to get listeners in?
Yeah, apologies if this is kind of well known to everyone on the call, but when we talk about a cold open, it's basically, can we come up with a scene to drop listeners into the middle of the action and then take them back to the beginning of the story and kind of patch them up to where we are in the present day. It was really hard deciding on a piece of tape, because we wanted to find something that would give you an indication of where the story was going to go or some of the themes that it might explore without telling you a huge amount. So that, and this is quite specific to Love and Radio, we try and find things for those stories that are a little bit disorienting. You're not really sure what's happening, and I'm not I'd be interested to hear what everyone thought, because I still go back and forth on whether or not we got the balance right. We start with the scene where David experiences his first kind of dramatic reenactment. And as the listener is hearing it, they're like, what the hell is going on? Like, this sounds really weird. Is this going to be a cult story or what? And then he talks about life change. He didn't know what he was looking for, but it certainly worked, whatever. And then again, it's trying to provoke a bunch of questions in the listener, so that they want to continue listening to the end of the piece, but not provoking so many questions that nobody has any idea what's going on and they just switch off and leave. So that's the balance that we were trying to get. But I love starting with a piece of tape. It's actually quite lazy sometimes, because you can just pick a really good scene and like, okay, great, we'll shove it at the start, and then that's the beginning, and work out where to go from there.
Yeah, love that. We've got a question from the chat, so I'll just read it out. It's from Daniel, which is, from the offset, there was such honesty from the interviewee in personal matters that it would be difficult to talk about with anyone. How did you go about building that relationship, and how much time did you spend together?
Oh goodness. I had a real luxury with this story. So David and I actually spoke for 7 hours, kind of over the course of multiple interviews. And obviously it's only a 40-minute episode. There was so much that we didn't use. I actually think it was probably overkill. I don't think we needed quite that long. But it's really hard. And I feel a bit wary saying this out loud because there's definitely an imbalance of power between the person doing the interview and the person who is kind of on mic. But when you hear me share personal anecdotes in that, it's because we were genuinely having a conversation. And I think he felt like part of the reason I did it is so that he would understand that even if I don't have any shared experience, very much shared experience with him, I'm not Mormon, I certainly haven't launched a gay conversion therapy program or been through one. That I wanted him to know that we had points of shared reference. And the reason I say you need to be careful with it is obviously I'm completely in charge of what makes it into the episode and what doesn't. So it's not fair always to like build this great rapport with someone and then just slice them up to kind of present them how you want. I think I was always conscious of that. But it just feels like a normal way to interact with another human, to like talk mutually rather than just extracting information through questions. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, definitely. That's something that I think about a lot as well, that kind of like navigating that power imbalance. Because I think also something that I've experienced is like the same techniques that we learn or are taught as interviewers to get someone to, say things that we can use on tape are very similar to certain therapy techniques. And so, because effectively what you're doing is trying to get someone to open up about their personal experience. And as you say, you're doing that with your human normal person head on, but also with your producer head on, where you're like, okay, cool. I need him to give more context to this specific thing so I can structure it here and so I can do this and blah, blah, blah. This bit I'm probably not going to use. I'll let him finish speaking so I can ask the next question. What are the kind of considerations that you, like, did you have conversations with him before you turned the recorder on, for example, to kind of explain that it would only be 40 minutes out of 7 hours? Or what are the kind of things that you did to prep him, I guess, for that eventuality?
Oh my goodness. I feel a bit embarrassed. We actually really didn't talk about that very much at all. We emailed quite a lot back and forth because he was very nervous about doing it. This was maybe a month after the story had been splashed kind of on, Piers Morgan and God knows wherever else. So he was very hesitant. We didn't really talk about the length of the piece or anything. I just explained that I had a genuine interest in how he got here and why he changed his mind and what he feels like he's learned. But I didn't talk about the length of the piece or that. I think he just assumed that, we were going to talk for ages and some of it would be used and some of it wouldn't. But I did send him some episodes of Love and Radio to say like, this is what it could sound like. And then we just took it from there.
That's related to the next question in the chat, which is asking about, because he was so exposed in the media, was it hard to, what they've said is, was it hard to secure access to him? What was that process like?
Yes, it was. Hang on, was it hard? Hard? No. Did it take a long time? Yes. I think it was just being patient. So like I say, the first time I got in touch with him was probably too soon. It was maybe a month after the story had made global headlines. And the reason I probably didn't get in touch sooner is because it just took me a while to find his contact information. But he was very slow to respond and very nervous and asked a lot of questions. But the fact that he was asking questions, to me at least, felt like I had a tiny crack that I could. I don't know that it's very helpful to take into other stories that people are pitching, but I just genuinely had an interest in knowing like how he got to where he got to. And the more he was saying like, you always have to do the thing of like, I genuinely do want to give you an opportunity to tell your side of the story, but that doesn't mean that it's gonna, not have any difficult questions in, but this is a genuine curiosity. I don't know if that's helpful.
No, yeah, that makes loads of sense. I think that's also like a very good level of transparency to be like, I'm not Piers Morgan. I'm not here to catch you out, but I will be asking you to explain some of the things that I don't understand, basically. There's the next question is from G. G says, that was incredible. I was totally hooked. I found the structure really engaging. Did you have the idea of the structure before you interviewed him and developed it in this way, or did you build that afterwards? That's also my doorbell, and I will have to answer it because no one else is in my house. So I'm going to let you answer this question while I do that. I'm so sorry, everyone. I promise I'm professional.
Oh gosh, good question. Love and Radio would kill me for saying this. We work very differently now to how we worked then. At that point, I just gathered a bunch of material and we kind of worked out, we did far too many edits on it, working out like how to order everything. It's not the way that I would recommend doing it. It just takes forever. You get really, really familiar and really comfortable with the tape, which in some ways is what you should do. It's an audio story. But now when I think about narratives and structure, particularly because so much of the work that I've done before I joined BBC Studios was 6 or 8 episodes, I can't hold all of that information together in my head. So I tend to write a lot down, transcribe all of the tape, but try and organize it on Google Doc before going into the tape and cutting everything together. This isn't necessarily what you asked in the question, but one thing that we spent a lot of time thinking about as well is we kind of talk about it like a hard pivot. So David's talking about trying to tell his priest or bishop about his same-sex attraction, and we have quite a hard cut from that to him introducing his wife because we want to jolt you a little bit. And then again, he's just finished talking about all of the programs and the methods that they use to try and convince people that they're not gay, and we hard cut to a question about him sharing his life with a man. I think a lot of people assume this type of story is interesting and this topic is not, it's important, but it's not interesting. And actually, all of that to me is nonsense. Anything can be interesting just so long as you have little nuggets of surprise along the way. But no, I would not recommend gathering all of your tape and then trying to wrestle it into shape. You can if the piece is short, but it just took us ages. It was fun, but yeah.
Thank you. The next question is about, I guess about like aftercare. So Maya has asked, did he hear the final podcast episode before it went out? And what were his thoughts on it?
Good question. He did not, and I did tell him that he wouldn't hear it before we started chatting. It's not always possible, depending on how early you are in your career or how new the show is that you're reporting the piece for. But I think one thing that was really helpful in setting his expectation was having previous episodes of Love and Radio to send to him saying, this is what it will sound like, or the type of stories that we're interested in, so that he wasn't shocked. We did send him the episode before publishing it, not so that he could have any editorial feedback, but just so that he could hear it before it went everywhere. We told him we were going to do that, and that he wouldn't have any editorial say. But I think as well, because he had had all of this experience, we were lucky is the wrong word, but I think he just felt relieved that we weren't doing to him the same thing that had been done to him on Piers Morgan and everyone else. So yeah, I don't know if that's as thorough as we could have been. I think there are other stories where maybe you would need to take a bit more care, but that felt like a comfortable medium for us on this story.
Are you still in touch? What does it look like when you spend that much intense time with someone over a short period of time? And then I guess both of you continue with your lives. Was that the end? Did you follow up? Like, what did that look like?
This is really interesting. So David and I actually never spoke again after, not because, you know, we emailed a little bit back and forth, but that was it. But again, it goes to that point that we were talking about kind of toward the beginning of the session about this really weird type of intimacy that you have with the people that you're interviewing. You are extremely friendly with them because you are, it makes me sound like a vampire, but to a certain extent, I think that's what producers are, that you're drawing out all of this material from someone, all of this story, and you're showing a genuine interest in them because you are genuinely interested. Like, that's why you're interviewing them, but also there is a purpose for that. Like, you are making a thing, and you're going to publish it, and then you're going to move on to the next story. And I think, I don't know what the answer is, because I have had other interviewees. There was a different story that I made for Love and Radio called Mr. Mop, and he would just call me up for weeks and weeks afterwards, just to like have a chat. And it was a little bit awkward because you're like, well, I want to be polite, and like, I'm very grateful for you for doing this interview, but we're actually not friends, and I can't just continue this. I don't know, it's a very peculiar story, that one as well. So I'm really sorry, I don't actually know what the answer to that is, but just being polite, I think, and respectful, but setting boundaries.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, of like what your relationship is, I guess. We've got 2 questions about sound design, so I'll just read both of them. So Aisha said, I love the sound design, would love to know what inspired the music and soundscape. And Antonia said, the piece was really engaging and I'd like to know more about the music. It almost sounds like it's from a sci-fi show. Why did you choose it, and what was your intention with it?
Oh God, this is slightly embarrassing. But God, I actually have a playlist. Anytime I listen to a podcast where I really like the music, I will look up the album and add it to the playlist, and it's just called podcast music. It's like, when I'm not listening to podcasts, I'm literally anyway. But all of the stuff that I listen to just to concentrate when I'm writing or sending emails, it's just very beeps, clicks, no lyrics really. It's quite antisocial. But that's just the type of music that I gravitate towards. And I was incredibly lucky to work with a guy called Stephen Jackson, who is freelance. If anyone is hiring, he's brilliant. But he is an audio wizard. I basically said, oh, I want something like this. It's a guy called Joseph Shabson. And I think there's some Kate NV in there as well. I just said, like, this is the type of music that I like, because it's kind of romantic and a little bit dreamy in places. Can you find something like that or make something like that? And he just reached out to the record label and said, can we use it? And they said yes, which never happens. But Stephen is a genius. So yeah, I can't take credit for the sound design, unfortunately, but he was really good in that. I would say I have all of this archive, you know, clips of the sessions at church and clips from the outing, and this one clip of David with his wife, and promo clips, like, you know, use whatever you want. And Stephen just placed it all and found the right spot for it. So
yeah, I was thinking about that when you were talking about the hard pivots. I think that happened in the story, and it also happened in the sound. Like, there were a couple of moments where you know, the scene would change and it would be the music that set a new tone, and then you would hear him speaking. And that relationship is very interesting.
Yeah, I think I'm almost certainly misremembering this, but Ira Glass, who's the host and creator of a show called This American Life, which is honestly one of my favorite shows in the entire world. It's maybe an obvious one, but it's just brilliant. He talks about using music, like, if you want to land a point, or if you want what someone's just said to like really get into the head of the listener, that you should let them say it and then have a couple of seconds of music afterwards so that the thought or the moment isn't interrupted, and then it's maybe an obvious point, but that's very intentionally what we tried to do, to be like, they've said something important, we're not going to have any more tape, we're just going to let the music fade out, and then we will come in with something new.
Yeah, that's something I really have to remind myself to do, because once I've made a piece, I've obviously spent like a bajillion years thinking about every single point, so I know everything. And I forget that then things become less shocking to you, or like, yeah. And you have to remember that people need processing time. And something similar that someone said to me once is that like the listening experience is very different to reading a book in that it's only linear.
Yeah.
So even if you're like, but I did the context at the beginning that I said, I said he was gay or whatever it is. People hear that once and then but they're like 3/4 of the way through the story again, and they might not remember that exactly, because where they are is in the present moment of listening. And so that's like a decision, a set of decisions you have to make when you're structuring something as well, I think.
This is why I find it so hard to structure just using tape now, because then you get like tape blind. You just listen to it and listen to it and listen to it, and it's like, whereas if I roughly get the story on the page, I've transcribed all of the interviews and I'm rearranging everything. It's not entirely perfect, but it keeps my ears a bit fresh for the tape, so that when I listen to it, I can hear the surprise like I want it.
Yeah, I love that. We have a question from Hugh in the chat. So Hugh says, I'm intrigued as to the decision, how much of your own story and perspective you included in the final edit. I thought it was a really endearing moment and maybe helped give an insight into a bond or trust between the interviewer and interviewee. Is that something you generally do, or was it because of the subject matter was pertinent to your own life experience?
It's a good question. Again, I can't really take credit for this. It's kind of a Love and Radio staple, I think, that Nick, who's the creator of the show, really doesn't like the suggestion of any distance or professionalism of journalist and interviewer. He's like, this is messy, we're all people, let's just like blur it a little bit. So I probably was like, oh no, we should take me out, I'm not in it. And he probably was like, no, we have to have more of it. Like it is also mortifying, my like very awkward laugh when I ask him if he's in the bed with his wife and the gay lover. Like, of course he wasn't, but Nick liked that. And actually, if I think about it, and this is probably rationalizing it after the fact, if I talk about the journey of sympathy that we want the listener to go on, I can act as a little bit of a stand-in for the listener, because I genuinely was sympathetic to him, then horrified, then like conflicted. So to the extent that I'm in the piece, if we can help guide the listener's emotions that way, yeah.
Yeah, I had a question about that, I guess, about like accountability in stories like this, where, I mean, not that you, well, I also don't share that many life experiences with him, but I am a queer person, and so I have a personal stake in this story as well. And I really, every time I listen to it, go through a series of emotions of like real anger and then empathy, and then I feel a conflict between those things of like, squaring the harm that he's caused, and then a kind of more, holding space for his own personhood and his own experiences. And I guess like that's an interesting balance to strike as the producer of the story. And I'm sure there would have been, I guess, like when you were thinking about the audience, obviously Love and Radio has a general listenership. It's a really, really popular podcast, but were there any specific listeners that you had in mind when you were making it? For example, were you thinking about the people who have been through his course, or were you thinking about, do you see what I mean? Like, who were you imagining when you were making the piece?
Yeah, good question. I purely by accident, I found out about Journey Into Manhood and actually started by interviewing a couple of the people that had been on it, because I thought that was going to be the story. But they have incredible and horrifying stories, but it felt more intriguing to me to try and understand the person that made it. So I think, having spoken to them going into it, as friendly as he was, I never really got bewitched by his charm. But what does that mean for the story structure? I do, like I say, I do think it's the ending isn't as strong as I would have liked. I wish I had been firmer with him. I think he only, to the extent that he has any kind of realization about what he's done, it's an ongoing process. But I think it was only possible because I was gentle with him. But I think if I'd held his feet to the fire a little bit more at the end, it would have had more impact. Also, again, because I'm a vampire, I did want him to like cry and really like realize what he'd done, and we didn't quite get there, which would have been like perfect. But it was, like I say, part of a journey for him, and I do think he had some kind of realization over the course of the interviews.
And also, like, as a listener, in terms of a learning experience, like, one of the things I found most interesting that he says towards the end is, these are some things that this is some harm that I've caused, and if I go there, I will not like really recover. Like, he kind of like admits that he doesn't want to truly hold himself accountable, because that would be really, really, really hard and potentially life-ruining for him. And that is a really interesting thing to hear someone say when you're thinking about how to move yourself in the world, is like, how do you do that yourself? You know, how do you not avoid things that you've done, basically, is kind of interesting. Someone has asked, Lisa, I hope that's how you say your name, has asked, I really like the conscious choice of pauses. How did you decide when to add that space for the listener / story? I know that you didn't sound design this episode, but maybe you could talk more broadly about the decisions that you make around space.
Yeah, good question. Maybe this is an obvious point, but certainly when an interviewee is processing something, to the extent you can hear that cog turning because they are pausing whilst there's obviously a nervousness about having it be quiet for too long, but I think as much of that as you can keep in, I feel like listeners aren't dumb. They kind of understand what that silence means. It means that some processing is going on. And the only other thing that I can think about that's constructive in terms of silence and pauses is, as I say, just to try and like make sure that the listener has processed what we've just told them before we move on to the next thing. That can either be because we are moving scene and there's been a jump ahead in the timeline, or we just want to be able to let you keep up, or it's because they've said something impactful and we want that sentiment to sit with the listener. I think those are the main reasons why we would space it out the way that we did. Or Stephen.
Yeah. Thank you. We have from Caroline a statement, not question, but so refreshing that having got such a wonderful interviewee and story, you let him speak. Too often for my taste, the producer / journo fades out the protagonist and tells their story for them. Why would you do that when you have such superb first person audio? Which makes me think, I would like to ask about this in terms of like the focus of this being structure and structuring for surprise. One of the, I guess, like it's much easier to have a voiceover in a piece like this, because it means you don't have to get every single thing. The interviewer doesn't have to say every single thing. If they take too long saying something, you can just fade down, write it in a script, say it in a couple of sentences, then fade them back in. So like, personally as a producer, I also prefer first person led pieces like this, but it's much easier for me to have a little bit of leeway with a script, because I can use that as a backup. When you don't have, so Love and Radio never uses script. so what was your kind of approach to structure in that way into
It's yes, it's very difficult. So when I started producing, most of the pieces that I were making were kind of things like that, basically character studies, where a person had a story that in my mind illuminated something interesting about the world or them or us or whatever. But 40 minutes was the longest I've ever done. Normally it was half an hour. Some of the pieces that I made for an excellent show called Shortcuts are sort of 6 minutes. It's much easier to do non-narrated. This is, sorry, a shameless plug, but the last thing that I made before I moved to BBC Studios was actually a 6-part series with Love and Radio that comes out on Monday. It's called Split Screen Thrill Seekers, and it's 6 episodes, 1 story across all 6. It's entirely non-narrated, and we have, I think, 5 or 6 different voices in there. Thank God. One of them is a woman, one of them is Scottish, one of them, they all have very distinct voices, so you can actually but it's really hard. And the sleight of hand that we did with this piece, and that we have used quite a lot more in Split Screen Thrill Seekers, is adding questions in, because otherwise it's really easy for the listener to get lost. I actually don't mind scripting too much. I just think people get lazy. I think a script can work really, really well if you are writing to tape. There are ways that you can have a voiceover interact with a piece of tape that's coming, or the tape can interrupt the script in a way that feels quite playful and quite natural. Natural is the wrong word, but enjoyable to listen to. And thinking about the theme of surprise, I actually think you're right in terms of structuring a story and making sure that there are elements of surprise. A script can point you in this direction, and then you have a piece of tape, and I quite like that interplay. But as I say, it's just hard to do it right. I was also quite lucky with the people that I interviewed for the character profiles that I made. Like, you have to have someone who is very good. And there are lots of people who have brilliant stories, but who just maybe are shy or not used to speaking in front of a microphone.
Yeah, for sure. This is a kind of follow-up question from Rosanna, which is, would you usually create a script from into transcriptions before going into editing? So I guess at what stage of edit would you start making that script?
Yes, I would. This is only the way that I do it, though. Everybody works differently. Lots of people, I think I was going to say most, but maybe that's not true. People, I think, just go straight in with the tape and like to listen and move things around in whatever editing software they're using. But as I say, because I get tape blind quite quickly, I much prefer to just transcribe everything. Firstly, you get to know your tape really well if you're transcribing it. Sometimes it's a nightmare if you've got hours and hours to do and you use automatic. But yes, I certainly for that piece transcribed it by hand on a computer, not and then just wrote the script to try and like organize the structure. Sorry, not for that piece, but for most pieces that I'm working on, that's what I'll do, because you can just test things out much easier than trying to do everything in editing software.
There's a follow-up question from Charlie, which is did you use Descript for this, which is a software that transcribes for you, which it sounds like you didn't do that for this piece.
Not for this one. This one I wrote by hand. I don't think I knew about Descript. It was quite a while ago that I made it. So no, this one I wrote manually, but for Split Screen Thrill Seekers, which comes out on Monday, stop it, that was all transcribed on Descript, and then we would edit everything in Google Docs. Never trust Descript. Do not edit in Descript. It will crash at the moment that you need it most. So use it for transcripts and then come back to it when you're going to assemble an episode. But we transcribed everything in Descript. I copied the chunks that I wanted into a Google Doc, wrote around it, moved things around, wrote around it some more, sent it to someone, edited it. And once we were happy with the Google Doc, then I went back into Descript, pulled all of the clips that I wanted, exported them into Reaper, and then tidied everything up in Reaper, if that's helpful.
Yeah, it's always so interesting hearing how other people do. It's always like slightly different. Cool. I'm just going to let everyone know we've got 5 minutes left, so probably time for 1 or 2 more questions in the chat. I just wanted to ask, especially just because this is like part of the Multitrack training series, it's always really interesting to hear how someone got into audio, like how you went from wanting to make audio to making something for This American Life, and now being, I want to say, head of programs head of audio
production, yeah,
head of production at BBC Studios. So that obviously you're like, you're in a really amazing position in terms of your career. So yeah, would it be okay to just like talk us through your steps of getting to where you are?
Yes, although I feel a little bit self-conscious about it because I was very lucky, and it's not necessarily easy to replicate. Basically, the job that I had allowed me to go down to 3 days a week. So I kept working that job for 3 days a week, and then used the money that I was earning through work to put myself through a master's program in radio documentary, which unfortunately no longer exists. It's madness. It was a great program. So I would do 3 days a week at work and 3 days a week at the radio documentary masters, which was quite tiring, but I couldn't really afford to just stop working. And then once I finished that master's program, I just started all throughout the year that I was on the MA. I would keep a Google Doc of any story that I thought was interesting. It would never be particularly well written or thought out. It was just a headline from an article that I was like, that seems interesting. I'd love to talk to that person. Or, someone would mention a story, and then I would go away and research it. And everything went into this Google Doc, so that when I got to the end of my master's, I had a bunch of ideas of stories that I wanted to do. Some of them I had made contact with the person that I wanted to speak to. Maybe I'd recorded like just a crappy telephone call with them, and then made a list of podcasts that I loved listening to, and individually sent out pitches to each of them with stories that I thought would be appropriate for them. The reason why I say it's not particularly sustainable is just because I was working all the time, like constantly. And I think I was just quite lucky with some of the podcasts that I reached out to. I always went for independent shows, at least to start with, or independent production companies. And basically figured that unless I have a small portfolio of stories of things that I'd made, that it would be harder to get future work. So I just kind of pitched all of this stuff with no idea about how I was going to pay for it. I was still working. I'd gone back up to 5 days, so I was still working. But just, made it in my free time until I had enough credits or stories under my belt that I could leave the job and then try and do the audio thing full time. Don't know if that's helpful.
No, it's true, which is helpful. We're just about to wrap up, so I'm just going to ask the last question that's in the chat, which is, you mentioned This American Life. Are there other series or programs that have been influential on your practice?
Oh goodness. Well, everyone should subscribe to Shortcuts because it's great. The company no longer exists, but I used to be very, very obsessed with a network called Gimlet. They used to make lots of really wonderful shows in the US. There's another, I listen to a lot of US stuff actually. There's another company called Pineapple Street that make really, really excellent podcasts. And Radiotopia is the network that Love and Radio used to be a part of. They've got loads of great shows. So there's Love and Radio, there's The Heart. What else do they have? All sorts. That's probably enough for now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tom.